Bulgogi, Korean bulgogi. You know, bulgogi. Thinly sliced beef cooked in soy sauce with carrots and onions. And if you don't live in Korea, that's probably the only kind of bulgogi you've had. But surprise, surprise, that's not the only kind of bulgogi back home. Because what does bulgogi actually mean? Well, bul means fire in Korean, and gogi, well, meat. So just flame-cooked meat. And actually, in North Korea, bulgogi is a more generic term for all grilled meats. But in the South, bulgogi usually refers to some kind of beef marinated and grilled. And I bet you haven't had these local bulgogis. Like this bulgogi from Onyang, near the industrial city of Ulsan in the Gyeongsang province. When highway construction workers in the 60s tried this bulgogi, they spread the word all across the country. And as you can see, this bulgogi is more like a giant grilled hamburger patty. And in that way, it's closer to dobiani, a possible ancestor to the modern bulgogi. Take your 1 pound of beef and chop into any small shapes you like. I did a combo of small cubes and thin slices. In a pinch, you can use ground beef, but most supermarket ground beef is too finely ground. We want this bulgogi to be a little chunky. And unlike other bulgogis, Unyang-bulgogi has a lighter marinade. For 1 pound of beef, we're adding in 2 tablespoons of soy sauce and sugar, half a tablespoon of minced garlic and sesame oil. Pour in the marinade and let's get messy. And don't be afraid to give it a good old rub.
Give your meat a good old rub. Yeah, boy.
Just until the meat sticks together like that. And you can spread this out in a pan and cook it like a burger, but in Unyang, this has to be cooked on a grilled basket in an open flame. Well, I live in an apartment, so I'm broiling it in the oven instead. Brush a little oil onto the grill, place on your beef patty, and for some reason, also put on a slice of oyster mushroom. Don't ask me why. Broil on both sides until it's slightly charred and comes off the grill in one piece. It took me about 5 minutes total. And the finished dish should just hold itself together, but still crumbly, juicy, and beefy. But now let's move eastwards to the province of Jeonla, specifically to the city of Gwangyang. Like its cousin in Gyeongsang, this bulgogi also has working class roots. When Gwangyang built its steel mill in the 80s, the steel workers made the local dish famous nationwide. That being said, the original recipe came from the 50s when local butchers began grilling various offcuts over briquettes. Take your ribeye and try to slice as thinly and wide as possible. Can't do it? Neither can I. So just take out your meat mallet, aka your fists, and pound into thin sheets. This tenderizes the meat too, of course. And when you finish pounding out your meat, you can move on to the marinade. For 1 pound of meat, we need 3 tablespoons of soy sauce and 2 of sugar, and 1 each of minced garlic and sesame oil. And I say marinade, but we don't actually marinate the meat at all. To not mask the flavor of the beef, we're only coating the sauce right before we're grilling. Just give it a quick mix and place your meat onto the grill. Broil for about 3 minutes total, and voila. Now this tastes more like the KBBQ you're familiar with. Individual slices of grilled meat barely coated in marinade. But here, the flavor of the beef is what shines through. And that you can only get by slicing your own beef and good cuts too. Finally, remember how I said there's a bulgogi in North Korea too? Actually, Professor Lee Gi-moon of Seoul National University says the word bulgogi was probably a northern dialect from the Pyongan province, which only became famous after the Korean War. So one could argue the bulgogi we know is really Pyongyang style, localized in Seoul. And this is probably the bulgogi you're familiar with. Hot pot style Seoul bulgogi. I'm using a frying pan, but for that old school experience, you need to cook this on a slanted copper grill with molded edges. I'll show you why in a minute. First, the marinade. For 1 pound of beef, I'm putting in 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 tablespoon each of sugar, minced garlic, sesame oil, and a sprinkling of pepper. So far, pretty straightforward, but now a pear. Especially if you're using a tougher, leaner cut of beef. Skin, core, blitz, and pour in about 1/3 of a cup of pear juice into the marinade. The enzymes in the pear will tenderize the meat and give your meat a fruitier, more complex finish. You can also use the same amount of apples or pineapples, and if you can't be bothered to blitz anything, just add in 1 more tablespoon of sugar and a couple tablespoons of water. Oh, of course, you can skip all of this and just use the pre-made stuff in a jar. And I won't judge you either. Now the meat. Now for today, I've used ribeye for all 3 recipes, but you can use skirt, sirloin, strip, basically any meat you can grill. Take a close look to see which way the muscle fibers flow, and slice as thinly as you can against the muscle grain. Of course, you can just use the pre-shaved stuff for Philly cheesesteaks. Pour in the marinade and, well, marinade. I'd say an hour in the fridge, but no longer than a day. The sesame oil will turn rancid and give off this weird funky flavor. I'm not putting in any vegetables, but feel free to throw in some sliced onions, carrots, mushrooms, or peppers. Flame on high, pour in a little veggie oil, and saute the beef for about 3 minutes. Don't worry about the juices pooling at the bottom, and serve as soon as the beef turns brown like that. Serve with rice, with noodles, on tacos, on a hoagie roll, go to town. Oh, and that remaining juice? To really drive the North Korean influence home, pre-boil some buckwheat noodles and simmer in that liquid gold. If you go to old bulgogi houses in Seoul like Ureok, this is how they still do it. So there you have it. 3 authentic local bulgogis from 3 different parts of Korea. Different techniques, but all delicious. But are these the bulgogi everyday Koreans eat? Not really. And that's